Hello, this is Father David Nix, Padre Peregrino. I'm joined today by Layla and Leanne. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here, Father.
We are going to race through some really big topics because Layla is fulfilling her first vocation as mother and has a lot to do, and I'm sure Leanne does also. So I'm just going to give a quick bio of both ladies. I'm so enthralled to have join us today as we talk about feminism and divorce. Layla's a married woman to her husband of 28 years. They live in Phoenix, where they're still raising the youngest of their 8 children. They have 2 girls and 6 boys, ages 27 all the way down to 9, and they currently have 7 grandchildren. She's been on EWTN and is the author of 3 books, including Primal Loss and Raising Chaste Men and Made This Way. We'll be discussing a bit of the first 2 today. Leanne and her husband, having spent many years in Germany, they now live in also the Phoenix area and have grown children and now young grandchildren as well. She has a master's in educational administration and is an enthusiastic and grateful convert to the Catholic Church. She's also co-author of the Catholic Academy for Life Leadership, a team leadership program used in the Diocese of Phoenix, covering the theology of the body, reproductive biology of men and women, pro-life issues, and bioethics, and serves on the board of Bioethics Defense Fund. She is a former manager of a pro-life pregnancy support center and still helps adoptive families as well as women in unplanned pregnancies as they discern parenting or adoption. And one thing that she can help you with a little bit later to any listeners out there, she also actually has secret Facebook administrative groups, or rather, she administrates secret Facebook groups for adult children of divorce. We're going to talk about just the pain that is caused by divorce. And Layla, you really opened my eyes about a year ago when I thought I was kind of the edge of enlightenment for priests because I understood that when there's false declarations of nullity that are given out precisely because annulments are best guesses by chanceries. They're not efficacious acts like the sacraments that are formed. And, the number one canon that actually our own teacher at Novus Ordo Seminary said was misused in all of this annulment stuff was lack of due discretion. In other words, tons of American couples get this divorce/annulment under the aegis of lack of due discretion. Well, that's basically everybody. No one goes into their vocations the right way. And I thought I was kind of the edge of enlightenment when I said, well, you know what, if these are just best guesses and they're handing these out like candy, then in that case, then there's a lot of people who are getting, committing adultery. Now, of course, any listeners out there who've had annulments, we certainly are obedient to the church, so there is no sin in listening to those. Now, the tribunals who are handing these out like candy, I wouldn't want to be them in the final judgment by any means. But I think what you really opened my eyes to, Layla, when we were discussing this is, I thought I was just so enlightened in fighting the adultery side of this, where you really showed me that what happens when you get a divorce/annulment is the one group of people nobody's paying attention to is the children. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's got to be kind of hard on them. But you really convinced me anything short of physical violence, you got to work out because the children of divorce, especially once they're able to formulate that as the adult children of divorce, are very injured, to put it very mildly. And so I'd like to jump into today's podcast. If you could give us just a couple quotes from actual couples, or rather actual adult children victims of divorce. And Layla herself, thanks be to God, is not the child of divorce. God rest your father's soul, who just died a few weeks ago, Layla.
Yes, thank you.
And but if everyone out there just say maybe a Hail Mary in this podcast for her father. Farouk was his name?
Yes, Farouk Habra. Thank you.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to pause the podcast out there and say Hail Mary for the repose of his soul, sound like a very holy Catholic man. But if you'd like to tell us anything from Primal Loss, this is a book that really, really had a lot of sales because it was all just the adult children of divorce describing the pain in their lives that their parents probably never thought of when they got divorces, even Catholics when they got the annulments.
Yeah, so you weren't the only one that kind of didn't really understand or know what was going on. Until I actually asked these questions, which was kind of a whim itself, I didn't realize I was kind of one of these people who, again, like you, I didn't think of the children. I thought of my suffering friend or someone who didn't, maybe marry a very nice person or whatever. And so I would be the kind of person who said, well, you could probably just, you can get your divorce and you can get your annulment and move on. So I wasn't thinking about the kids either. divorce. So this was completely news to me, which shouldn't be, because really the idea that children have as much a stake in a marriage and a family as the adults should not be some kind of incredible, news flash. But apparently it is, because even for me, I've been teaching the faith for 25 years, and it just never really occurred to me to think about what happens to the children when we've told all the adults to move on. So some of the quotes, I'm going to give you some that are from, because we're talking here about divorce, marriage, I mean, the impact on society, the impact on our church, the impact on these children. When these kids grow up, because see, it's not a once and done thing. We think it is, they're resilient, they'll just bounce back.
Yep.
They have to then take all that baggage, everything, the wounds and the things that the destruction of their identity, their family, everything they can't even place because, they're children, they can't figure all this out. They don't know what these emotions are about. They then have to go forward and make a life. They have to somehow make a marriage. Well, they don't have a model for what a marriage looks like. They have seen that conflict leads to permanent separation. So how do they approach their marriages? And some of the most poignant things that some of them told me was a specific question on marriage. How did your parents' divorce affect your view of marriage or your marriage specifically? And some of these people, even when they really want to make things work, it's very hard for them because they don't have any role modeling. And so we have the quotes like this, and it's amazing how similar a lot of these are.
And this comes from an adult child of divorce.
These quotes I'm going to give you are from adult children of divorce from my book, Primal Loss.
Great.
And so here's a woman who's representative of many. And by the way, I just want to say this, because I didn't come from divorce, I went into my marriage, and not a perfect person, believe me, I was a very lapsed Catholic at the time, but I never had any anxiety going into marriage thinking, oh no, what if it doesn't last? What am I going to do? I was like, yep, this is for life, whatever. I mean, it just was not even an issue in my mind. So it blew my mind to realize how many people are on edge when they go into their marriages.
Real quick, before you jump in, as a lapsed Catholic, why wasn't that in the back of your mind?
Well, because again, thanks to my dad and my mom, we were wonderful people. I was raised in the 70s and 80s, poorly catechized, but I still knew that there was an objective truth. I still had the model of an intact family. My parents always said, we will never divorce. I mean, divorce is not an option. It doesn't matter if they fought. It doesn't matter what. They were married when my dad died, almost 55 years. And so I had this model of just stability, even if things weren't perfect. That's the point. As Leanne and I often say, marriage is a life's work. You need a lifetime to work out how to love this other person. So,
and Layla, you and I have joked offline about how, because of your Middle Eastern background, you just understand yelling can be part of life. Right?
Exactly. I'm Mediterranean. I mean, come on. Anybody who's Italian or Arab like I am, come on. We talk. It's kind of synonymous with yelling. I mean, it's not a huge deal to us as far as oh no, everything's falling apart because someone's yelling. Yeah. Well, that's as Mother Angelica said. She said, I'm Italian. That's how we talk.
Yeah,
so,
and that's not just kind of a funny cultural thing I'm just putting on the podcast. I mean, I really do think that this is a problem in this Protestantized country where so many Catholics are Protestantized, where we think if someone's not nice, they hate me and I have to get a divorce. Like, in some sense, people have to learn that an argument is not the end of the world. But we can get to that later.
Yeah, there's a lot to say on that. Boy, there is.
There's a lot to say on that. We'll get to that later.
Okay, so this woman who has a good husband, she was representative of many people. She said, for the first few years of my marriage, I was very on guard and prepared for my husband to leave. In fact, I expected it. I would stash away money, hiding it in a drawer or my purse. I occasionally looked at the cost of one-bedroom apartments. It wasn't that I wanted him to leave, but in my mind, it wasn't even a question of if it would happen, but when it would happen. I fell further into a state of despair once we had our first child. I would always think about how I would take care of my child on my own, how custody would work, etc. It took many years for me to get past those feelings, and the thought of my husband leaving now never crosses my mind. However, I still remember when it consumed my every thought. I have another woman who said, we fear abandonment, and we often sabotage our relationships for fear of getting too close to someone and getting hurt all over again. I didn't know how to receive and accept real love. In the end, I would ultimately find a way to escape or sabotage the relationship to avoid the pain. It was a no-win situation for me. That was a woman who I think she called off about 5 engagements to really, as she claimed, wonderful Catholic men, and she just couldn't go through with it. A commitment.
Sounds like Tobias that we just finished in the old Divine Office. Right, because she wasn't Tobit, or no, his future wife, Sarah had 5 husbands killed by demons before they finally got on their knees and prayed, and that's why Tobit worked for her.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So there's something of a demon attacking all that. I hear that, and it's like, we'll get to that later too, but there's something of a demon attacking all this stuff.
Well, there's a spirit of divorce. So,
right.
That's a whole other,
Not just attitude of divorce, but a spirit.
No, a spirit, an actual,
Yes.
So, do you want some more quotes, or do you want to, we could discuss?
Please, let's keep going on some quotes, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to get you a couple men here, too, but here's another woman. She said, when my mother moved away at age 10, when she was 10, my fears of abandonment were strongly confirmed. Once I was married, whenever my husband and I would hit a rough patch, I would want to bail. And it is a miracle of the grace and mercy of God that we are still married now. And another said, the constant lack of... So
essentially, real quick, so that's so when people get a divorce, it teaches kids you don't roll with the punches in life.
Right. You have to bail. That's what you do.
Yep.
That's just, you go on to the next.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes against the vow, right? It goes against the permanency of marriage. It's a complete, no wonder everybody's so confused and mixed up. And so
that's right. And that's an important, sorry to cut you off again, but that's so important to mention the vow. That's a binary thing. We're in such a world of grays and mediocre, versions of what that horrible woman porn book, 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, we're in this world of mediocre yeses to everything, but vows are black and white. It's irrelevant how you feel 5 years after the vows, because the vows were taken,
Right. So here's another. She said, the constant lack of security I always feel carries over into my own marriage. Like, if my own father could betray my mother, me, and my sister, why is my own husband above doing that? The bottom line is that my parents' divorce has brought insecurity into my own marriage. How could my husband love me enough never to betray our vows? Really, how is that even possible? I hate feeling that way. And then another woman, married 19 years. The beginning of our marriage was very difficult. As soon as I got married, I was sure my husband would cheat. I thought unless I could keep him perfectly happy, he would leave me. It seems bizarre to me today because he is such a good man, but that was really an honest fear. This led to so many fights, and I became so insecure and unhappy. And then another one said she thought anything could go wrong at any moment, that she'd be a single mother. She tried to be as independent as she could. And then here's another one. I struggle with trusting my husband. See how similar all these are. I struggle with trusting my husband. I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop, which I'm sure must be related to the feeling of abandonment by my family of origin. And now from a man who is still unmarried in his late 30s. He said, marriage seems impossible. I desire it, but I fear it. My desire to avoid hurting my future children is exceptionally strong. I do not want them to know the pain I have known. And then another man who's been married for many years, he said, I believe that since the beginning of my own marriage, I have been testing its permanency. I have been playing the I'll leave you before you leave me, or I'll keep you at a distance so you can't hurt me for most of my life. And then just a couple more, if you will, from a married woman in her 50s now. If a child is constantly aware that half of him is unacceptable to one parent and that parent's family, how can he ever find himself acceptable or trust a partner who claims that all of him is acceptable? By the way, in just reading over that last sentence, it seems so matter of fact. It's impossible to convey how truly debilitating and soul-wrenching that ingrained unacceptability becomes. And then another person said, I don't think people understand how guarded someone can become, especially someone who has been taught that love is conditional. And then, and again, I can keep going. It started when I would get snippy with my husband, and he managed to coax out of me that I was distancing myself from him on purpose. Because she said, because I told him it would make it easier for me when he left. And he was shocked. Why would I think he would leave? I reminded him of all the fathers that have come and gone, and he's just next in line. I still think things like, that's it, this is going to be the time that I spend too much on groceries, and he's going to blow up and leave. And then another one. I fear more than anything abandonment. It's an irrational fear. My husband is a saint. I do still fear after 32 years of marriage that he will leave. I sometimes despair to the point of suicidal thoughts, feeling I am unworthy of love. I ask him constantly if he is mad or if he still loves me. I do have those dark times. These are agonizing moments. Now, Father, I don't know about you, but
Well,
that hurts me because I've never felt that in my life going into my marriage, and I was struck by how similar. Again, there's a whole chapter of 70 people answering this question. The similarities, as you can see, are just they're mind blowing. And we've got all these walking wounded out there. We don't even know it.
Absolutely. Now, what do you say to people who say, okay, I hear what you're saying about insecurity, lack of trust, and abandonment, and you're just using these quotes from adult victims of divorce to show that if they do that to their kids, those kids are going to have insecurity, lack of trust, and abandonment. But what about kids growing up with the verbal fighting? Again, we'll bracket, physical violence, but we'll just talk, if you get pushback from other Catholics saying, yeah, I hear what you're saying, that the kids of divorce have some insecurity, lack of trust, and abandonment, but wouldn't it be worse? Wouldn't they have more lack of trust, more abandonment issues if they grew up in an environment where the parents weren't very happy with each other?
So I'm going to throw that question to Leanne because she deals with hundreds of adult children of divorce, and she's also an adult child of divorce herself. And I know that she has a list of things that will happen to any child that is the victim of divorce, whether or not the divorce was a amicable, good divorce, or whether it was from a really abusive, terrible situation. There are certain things that happen after divorce that affect a child no matter what, and
Awesome.
none of it is it just gets better and wonderful. So awesome. I'm gonna throw it to Leanne.
That sounds great. And Layla's been on this podcast before, so we welcome now Leanne for the first time. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me here. So I administer these groups. So people who, usually through Primal Loss, find out that there are these secret Facebook groups and they can come and talk about their experience as an adult child of divorce. They usually come in pretty timidly. They're afraid of posting something. They're afraid that someone will see it and will know what they actually think, which is quite irrational, and they know it. They'll say, I know no one can see inside a secret group, but it scares me that maybe my parents might find out that I have these thoughts about. Okay. So they really do not want to hurt their parents. So they really wish that they could have their own thoughts and it would never reach anyone who lived in their house to make things worse for what they've already experienced.
Makes sense.
So, for example, if they have a mom who was abandoned by her husband, everything they say, about how much it's been difficult for them personally, just makes it worse for mom, so they don't want to talk about it. So and some of them are told to not talk about it. So when you go to one house, you are to have certain things, and when you go to certain thoughts and talk about certain things, you go to the other house, you shut all that off, because they don't want to hear about the other family, the new family, and then you become this different person. So you have to be, who you're supposed to be when you're at different places. It's very difficult. What was the original question? What specifically?
Well, I think, how would you answer it if someone said, yeah, I understand that kids of divorce are going to struggle with lack of trust, but isn't it worse for them to grow up in a verbally violent environment where the parents don't want to stay together?
Right. Okay.
Like, there might be people who hesitatingly believe primal loss, but then say, but it's going to be worse if the parents aren't happy.
Okay. Well, obviously, where people are in danger, they are going to want to be away from that danger. So that still does not mean they won't have a lot of the same effects. It's just they will have difficulty admitting it to themselves. So they're going to experience a lot of the loss of identity, the problems in, just sort of self-confidence and trusting others, all the things that you have if you have a low conflict divorce with your parents, you'll still have. But as far as do they want it to have happened, if there was a lot of hostility in the home, they will still say they didn't realize how much worse it would get. So it's not like after a divorce things get better all the time. I think that's
interesting.
Yeah.
Really?
So, the divorce itself is a couple of years of very, very difficult financial problems that come along. There's usually moving. There's often new dating with the parents.
Yep.
They go into in and out of different relationships. There are strange people in your house.
Yep.
For people who are not, being chased or whatever, there can be, we've discussed the person standing in your kitchen in the morning when you come down as a 9-year-old in your nightgown, and there's a strange man there who's now, had spent an evening with your mom and was still there. So these things.
And these are actually aren't these the highest rates of child sexual abuse out there?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
yeah.
It's very high. So this is not, the child not having the same last name as the parent, that automatically puts you in a different category as far as that kind of risk. But it's not that things get better. So often when you go through the divorce process, you have lawyers who know how to make this thing happen, and it gets very, very ugly. So it brings out the worst in people who believe what their lawyers tell them, that they need to fight for this, this, and this. And instead of trying to find a way to handle it where people, where they just sort out the logistical issues, custody issues, finances, things like that.
Yeah.
I think people think that's what happens, but that does happen when people handle it well. But usually it gets really bad. And so there are, it's not like the after effects of the separation make things better.
Yes.
Usually there's a lot of difficulty. So let's suppose you have parents who love to scream at each other and whatever. If they haven't really resolved this, they haven't changed that within themselves, they're going to take that into the next relationship. So it doesn't mean the next relationship is going to be better. I mean, sometimes it is. My parents were both married several times, and sometimes things got better with the next relationship in certain areas, but it didn't get better in most areas. So a lot of the people in the private Facebook groups will say that even though it was very hostile at home, they would take that if they could get rid of all of the other effects that they've had. So they wish that they knew that at the time. In fact, several of them have real guilt because when their parents said something to them about, well, don't you think it's better that we are no longer in this, hostile environment, they would say, oh, yes, thank you. I'm so glad that you guys are getting a divorce. And of course, later they had, a little bit of formation, and they understood a little life experience, and they understood what had happened, and they felt very guilty because they thought they might have contributed to their parent giving themselves permission to go ahead and have the divorce. So, it doesn't necessarily get better. I think that's a myth.
I'm to be totally honest, I'm usually very, very bored when I hear Catholic celebrities talk, because they're just like one step out of Plato's cave of darkness, and just, they usually say some little ray of light they're telling everybody in the cave about, and these Catholic celebrities are giving the basics, and they bore me out of my mind. And all false flattery aside, every time I talk to the two of you, major light bulbs above my head, things that I really didn't realize. But amazingly, a lot of this stuff is common sense. So you're both blowing my mind and speaking total common sense. So I guess this maybe this explains why Catholic psychologists, all psychologists, but unfortunately I include Catholic under that umbrella of psychologists, even Catholic psychologists, I guess is the best way to put it. Even Catholic psychologists don't understand the things that you're saying. Why is that?
Oh my gosh. You've really hit on something we talk about quite a bit. Here's a tragedy in my mind. Catholics, and I count myself in this up until 2.5 years ago when I started asking these questions. And I'm 52. Like I said, it took me a lifetime to figure this out. Catholics are against divorce in theory, period. They are for divorce in practice. I am absolutely convinced that this is the case because I did it myself. I taught family, I taught theology, I taught all this stuff for 25 years. I'm teaching all this great Catholic, these Catholic truths about family and human sexuality. Barely touched on the topic of divorce. When divorce did come up, it would be something like a friend who wanted out, and oh my gosh, you what? Oh, he said what to you? Oh, what? Oh my goodness, you deserve better than that, and there's a whole big thing that happens, and then you're like, well, your marriage probably isn't valid anyway, because pretty much wink, wink. I thought I'm a good writer. I'm thinking I could get an annulment. I know this I don't want to make anybody upset, but it's just, that's how the laity sees things. Because
that's a good thing. Priests are a lot better on that front.
Well, yeah, here's the deal. Here's the deal. So now that we know that the lady, and again, you know, we're against divorce, except when it comes to the people we're around and the people in our sphere of influence,
Yep.
the people that we love, our family, our friends, and then all of a sudden we're all about let's get them out and move them on. So
Yep.
we're not willing to take that stand in a messy situation, which, by the way, we could talk about that if we have time, because we're trying to remedy that as well, Leanne and I and some other people. But the Catholic priests, and God love you, Father, we love what you're doing. We're all getting red pilled. We're all awakening from our spiritual stupor on this issue. But Catholic priests, even the good ones, and Catholic therapists, even some of the good ones, are counseling for divorce like you would not believe. Like
Yep.
you would not believe. It is shocking to me. I can't really get into it because it's upsetting, but there are situations in my own personal life and sphere of influence where I have seen with my own eyes people that I have sent to very good priests, people not looking for divorce, not looking for separation, and they were literally told to separate, to divorce, and you probably don't have a valid marriage anyway. And these are the good ones. So we are crazy.
So to recap real quick, this is because they're against divorce in theory, but not in practice when they face the cross in someone's life that they love.
Yes, and nobody wants another person to suffer. And we're to the point where so many people have divorced, and people we love, people in the pews, people who are good, pious people. You know, we don't want to say, well, you were wrong to do that. For some reason, we're okay kind of with the abortion issue. We will do it then. You know, we'll say, even the people we love, even the people in the pews, we're still going to speak out against it. But for some reason, we don't really believe that divorce is that bad, and that divorce kills and aborts a family, a marriage, you know, a future, generations.
Yes. And I think you're right. There's certain issues now where in the 1990s, priests and housewives could not speak up against abortion, and now those boundaries have expanded, and that's okay. But then I think there's other things where you're exactly right, that we, you know, like maybe a couple finds out that if they have a fourth or fifth pregnancy, that baby is going to endanger the mother's life. And even though we are technically against, you know, vasectomies or tubal ligations or the IUD or the pill, well, if it's going to kill her and we're really not sure natural family planning in this case is going to work, well, you can probably find even a pro-life priest to give you the wink and the nod to do something evil like that. And I think you're right. I think it's because we don't like to see the people that we love have to carry the cross. Would Jesus want them to carry their cross? Obviously, the answer is yes, that we do have to carry a cross. But, you know, Layla, in text a few weeks ago, I said, all these divorces are due to priests not preparing people. And once again, I mean,
I'm sorry, Father. I always come in and I contradict you, and I'm like, no, Father, I don't think that's it.
But I mean, but see, that's the thing is you're one of the few people who actually wins arguments against me. And I win most of them, and you lovingly crush me on these, and you show me that, well, in this case, that you've known numerous people who were well prepared by priests. And I'm like, okay, Layla, so what's the deal? And you really said it's not carrying the cross, and it's feminism. So I'd like to give this as a launching point to you. First, not carrying the cross being men's chastity. I know you wrote a book on raising chaste boys and men. Maybe give us a little bit of that, but then jump right into feminism, because we're going to call this podcast Divorce and Feminism. So I think you hit something huge on the head, that we all, especially in the West, I mean, Fulton Sheen had this amazing line that I heard him say once. He said, those in the East want the cross without Jesus, and those in the West want Jesus without the cross. He didn't mean Eastern Christians like Catholics in China. He meant the communist state. People under the communist state in China who are not Christians are willing to work 18 hours a day for the state. They'll work till their hands are bloody. They understand suffering, but they're not working for something valuable. We're in the West. We want to work for something valuable, Jesus, who's the second person of the Trinity, but we don't want to work too hard and bloody our hands and everything. So I thought his line was very, very profound. We in the West want Jesus without the cross, and those in the East want the cross without Jesus. So anyway, You really opened my eyes just to see at the core of this divorce culture, at the core of this feminism culture, is men not willing to carry their cross on issues of chastity like porn, and women not willing to carry their cross in opposition to feminism and what marriage is about. So I'll just wind you up and let you go. Those two.
So, and then I'll throw it to Leanne, too, on feminism. We've really brainstormed a lot on this, but we all need a little deprogramming, including me. But what we don't understand is that we're seeped in this kind of contemporary spirituality, this Catholicism that's more a contemporary spirituality rather than the Catholicism of the saints. And so I always tell people, step back, stop looking at contemporary writings, even me or whoever, just go back for a few weeks, months, and just read the saints of old.
Yes.
They all talk about the cross. They all talk about the cross. And nobody today, if you're online, if you're on Instagram, if you're a young millennial wife and mother, born and bred on equality and feminism and all this, and you don't even know it, you're not even aware of it. Yeah. You go and you look on Instagram at all the Catholic young influencers, and they're just as young and they're just as ignorant, and they all talk about self-fulfillment and, kind of how to be happy, and it's always kind of happiness and contentment in your life, like fulfilling your passions or doing what you kind of want, and nobody, you never hear, suffer. You're going to have to suffer. Sorry, you're going to have to carry a cross, and actually it's going to be your joy. If you become holy, that's going to be your joy. But they don't want to. If I have had people yell at me privately, publicly, in every which way to say, don't tell me to bear my cross. Don't tell me, who are you to say, God, they'll use this term, God doesn't want you to suffer. And I'm like, have you ever looked at the life of a saint? I mean, have you ever read the Bible? I don't know where they're getting this, but that is what we are now. That's our mindset going in, is that we're getting married. We're these young women. We're getting married. Our husbands are going to be really romantic, and they're going to fulfill all of our girly fantasies of what that looks like on a big screen. And we don't really want to marry men, apparently, because we want really just a girlfriend that looks like a man. And
you mean someone who's going to be like talk as much as women?
Absolutely, and fulfill my emotional needs.
Yep.
It's like, no, that's why God gave you girlfriends. That's why we have girls. That's why we talk to women. It's not, men aren't there to be our girlfriends. Yeah. So we've got this misunderstanding between men and women. What are men? What are women? What's this relationship? What's this complementarity? And then women get discontented, and very easily we can be turned against our husbands. And so this is happening all the time among Catholics, especially younger Catholics. And it is, I'll throw it to Leanne too, but it really is, we don't recognize it maybe as feminism, or we say that it's the good kind of feminism. We're only the good type of Catholic feminist. Well, I don't know. If we're discontented with our husbands because they're not acting like our girlfriends, or if they might raise their voice to the children, or they might be gruff or rough. I always go back. I think we had this previous podcast, Father, where we talked about, men and women. Well, women can do the same thing to men. Women can be critical, and they can call names, and they can say, you're not doing this right, or you're not doing this, I need this, I need that. And then we think we're noble because we're fixing our guy, right? We're fixing this man to be a better person. If he does the same thing to us, if he's critical, if he calls a name, if he says you're not doing this right, then he's a brute, he's nasty, he's an abuser, and he needs to be divorced. We need to divorce him and move along. We don't even see it in ourselves. Women don't see it. So,
and why do you think, either of you can jump in on this? I mean, why do you think it's okay nowadays for the guys coming out of seminary? It's seen as really awesome if they give some rah-rah homily to really whip men into shape from the pulpit, but everyone would love it, and you'd see all the women nudging their husbands, like, you got to be a spiritual leader, you got to get off porn, all these things that I totally support, that we should be preaching against men. But if we got up in anywhere but a Latin Mass parish and said these things that you're saying, like, women, stop looking for your husbands to be emotionally pleasing, you got to trash feminism, put on some modest clothes, all this stuff. There would be a very different spirit in the air. Why are we priests permitted to challenge men nowadays in America, but not women?
Leanne, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's all over the place. It's when you watch, and I don't watch television anymore, but I know from years ago it started where the men are the kind of doofuses, right, and the women are the ones who have their act together. This has been going on for quite a while. I think even men believe it, first of all, and I think that a lot of the priests grew up in this as well, and they probably think they're doing something good by saying, hey, we need to build up the women, but that's not the problem. The problem is that women are always saying, you need to understand me as a woman, but who's saying we need to understand men? And that's where we are now. We need to be saying, this is the way a man is constructed. This is the way he operates. This is normal behavior for a man, and that, we need to be taking that into consideration as well. And I don't know if I would believe in the pendulum swinging. I mean, there were probably things that needed to be made clear for everyone regarding men and women being treated well, but now we are so far in the other direction that even men, so Layla and I are now receiving lots and lots and lots of referrals of people who are they're having problems with their marriages. Yeah. And even the men who are in these situations, they're trying to do everything they think is right and that they've heard priests talk about and they've heard in the general culture. They're almost becoming more like women, thinking, well, that will fix whatever problems we have in our marriage. And of course, the women are looking at them and saying, gosh, that's not an admirable way for you to behave. So the women don't really even want it.
And Leanne, I mean, I always preach against the pendulum theory as far as dogma and liturgy. I always say that there's no pendulum on dogma and liturgy, but I might grant it for the fact maybe in the 15th century priests possibly could have preached harder from the pulpit against women than men. I don't really know. I haven't read every sermon from the 15th century, but if you could say something to the female listeners out there, how men think, Leanne, how do men think? What do you want to tell them how men think?
Well, I'm not a man, so I would love for men to be able to say this. But what I know is they focus more. They think about one thing, and they think about it well. And women think about many, many things at the same time, and we integrate these things together. And those are two beautiful gifts. So whereas, and I know a lot of women, and I am one, the ability to shut out the rest of the world and just look at one issue is more difficult for women. And for men, that's what they do. In fact, women are upset about this. There's a man sitting there working on some project, and you cannot walk up and assault him with 10 different topics and expect to have a response come back, and not just a response, but one that's very where the feelings are taken into consideration. That's just not the way a man is constructed, and I think a lot of women do expect that. As Layla was saying, we expect them to be like girlfriends. I can tell you, when Layla and I sit down and talk, we've got many topics going on at the same time, and we get a lot done, but we don't get maybe one thing done that we should have focused on. So
you both find that there's a certain danger.
It's not that we...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I think we have a bad connection for a second. Well, I was just going to say you both have a problem with these Facebook groups where Catholic women get together and complain about their husbands. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, if I could say one thing as loud and clear as many people would hear it as possible, it would be that when a woman is having an issue in her marriage, she will go to her friends and she will talk about it. And those friends, especially, we could speak to Catholics, those friends have a responsibility. They might have been at their wedding, but they support marriages. They have a responsibility to encourage that woman in her marriage. And instead of doing that, she empathizes. Now, empathy is a wonderful thing that a woman offers. She brings mercy and the ability to empathize into a marriage. But when she's around with a group of friends or online, it's an empathy fest. It's oh my gosh, that's terrible, and you can't be expected to handle that. And instead of let's look at what you could be learning through all of this and becoming holy and saying, yes, that sounds like it's difficult. And how do we handle things that are difficult? This is your person. This is your husband.
Yes.
He's your person for life. And you're going to be married to him always. So, it's different when you say you're going to get an exit ramp out of it. Then you just build a case against him. Your discontent grows. They feed the fire of discontent, and it gets worse. And if women could realize their responsibility to encourage the marriage. Sure, you can listen to your friend and you can say, that you understand and all of that, but you need to, it's your responsibility to encourage them in their marriages, all of your friends in their marriages, and not help them undercut them and feed that fire of discontent.
And that's excellent. I think all that ties together, just that you have to realize men think differently. And, I think real quick, 99% of my listeners out there, they're going to know we're not letting men off the hook for physical violence and things like that. We're talking about your average Catholic marriage where there's some malcontent, maybe there's some screaming, maybe he's lazy, maybe he, whatever, doesn't fulfill you emotionally, whatever. And that's beautiful and strong words from you both to say to the women, that the true mercy in this situation is going to be to encourage them to stay in this, and how to, should I say, get help? Do most of these marriages need counseling, or
right,
is that?
They need to understand some basics about marriage. So these young people go into marriage, and of course at some point both the wife and the husband are going to look at one another and go, wow, maybe I'd imagined this differently. Okay, so there's that stage you have to get through. Plus, if they have some somewhat traditional roles, the husband is going to be focusing very much on building, his career or providing for the family, protecting the family. And the woman is going to be doing things that are more related to the home and children. And some things typically happen. A long time ago, everyone knew that. And now they have problems with it. So he's spending more time at work. She feels neglected. All right, that's not a huge issue in a marriage historically. It was a given. Yeah. And now it's a reason to think he doesn't love me anymore. He's not giving me enough attention or whatever. And the women need to also understand the men need a lot of support as they're doing what they're doing.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So these are typical problems. Or when the children move out of the house, there's another flashpoint where the children are getting toward the end of high school. The youngest children, they're starting to move out. And, sometimes the mothers have begun to work again, and they start saying, wow, I feel much more valuable doing these other things. It's not that their husband thinks they're not valuable. It's they feel more valuable at work, and they're not feeling content at home. And so that often creates problems. And this is another point where a lot of these marriages are falling apart, at least that are coming to us. It's the women wanting to leave.
Yep, I believe that. And, one of the things I said on my first podcast with Layla, I said, when I prepare young adults for marriage, as crude as it might be, I often say to them that the man is not going to be as sexually fulfilled as he wants in this marriage, and the woman's not going to be as emotionally fulfilled as she wants. That he's not going to get someone with the same libido as him, and she's not going to get someone who wants to talk for 5 hours straight. And now there are some different factors in that. I actually found out recently that what St. Thomas Aquinas says about paying the debt says apparently it was most Thomists now make it clear that it was actually the woman who asked for the quote-unquote debt to be paid as much. So that kind of shows maybe things were healthier in the past. Libidos were a little bit closer, but we won't go down that route. I think that there's a lot that could be another 5 podcasts. But
that could.
But what I'd like maybe the two of you to mention is, just since we're on this topic of like women realizing their husbands aren't going to be just other girlfriends, maybe you could tie the cross to feminism, to divorce. And real quickly, I really love how you mention, when you look through Instagram and stuff, all this contemporary stuff. And when you were talking, I was reminded that Fulton Sheen actually mentions in Acts chapter 17, in one of his commentaries on Acts chapter 17, that constantly Paul preaches the cross. But the one time he decided not to preach the cross was Acts 17, when he was at the Areopagus, and he quotes to the unknown God. He tries to do this stuff from some Greek poets and stuff, but he actually doesn't mention Christ crucified. And Fulton Sheen actually points out it's the one time his preaching totally failed. And it was after that he says that we have this famous line from Paul. He says, I resolved among you to preach nothing but Christ and Christ crucified. Now, after trying to be witty and meet the culture where it was at and stuff, and total failure, it's only when he says, when I resolved to preach Christ and Christ crucified. So I think you hit it right on the head, that this whole divorce culture is essentially, I like the idea of people carrying the cross, but not me carrying the cross, because people don't know how hard my situation is.
Yeah, and what they don't realize is that God has something for them if they just wait, if they just go through, keep their sacred promises, they take the grace of the sacrament, God has something for them. That's my next book. That's going to be a whole bunch of stories of survival through bad marriages to redemption.
Cool.
But what we are seeing is you throw off the cross, and isn't that the trick of the devil? You get a worse cross, and your children will get a worse cross, and their children's children. I mean, this cross is so... Yep. And it's of your own making because of your own sin. I mean, if we decide that we're not going to follow Christ, and his way is always, the way of the cross. It's the narrow way. It's a way of suffering. Yes. If we decide we're not going to do that, we're going to follow the world. And so that's going to lead us to darkness. Yep. It may feel good at first. And that's the trick always. And so I have a wonderful friend, Anne-Marie Schimberg, I like to say, she always says, if someone calls themselves a Catholic feminist, and we have a lot of those out there,
yep.
Catholic feminists, and they may be doing all the right things and going, to church and doing all the liturgical stuff, but if you call yourself a Catholic feminist, at one point or another, one of those is going to win out. Because they're really opposed to one another. The philosophy of feminism and Catholicism are kind of opposed, because anything that we need is already found in Catholicism. And so whatever feminism is, which is an ideology, lots of opposition there, especially because it's all about killing the patriarchy. And quite frankly, Catholicism is a patriarchy. So you've got one of them is going to win out, and almost always these days feminism wins out over Catholicism. And I'm finding more and more of these young influencers who are now becoming ex-Catholics, if not formally, which some of them actually are saying I'm now not a Catholic, but they are also embracing New Age, Richard Rohr, Enneagrams, all these different, even Wicca, and they're still saying, well, I'm Catholic. I'm a Catholic feminist. No, you're morphing into the world. So we have to be really careful that if you don't carry your cross, you're going to fall off the path of Christianity. So stay the course.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
Can't believe it's two people from Boston College promoting the patriarchy.
Can you believe it?
We might be approaching the end of the world here.
It could be, Father. Yes.
That's great. Well, and I know you have to run to get your kids. This was a high content 47-minute podcast. So, ladies, do you have anything else just to sign off with?
Leanne, you want to?
One thing I would say is that one of the reasons that we had such a breakthrough with the abortion debate is people who were silent finally started to speak. And I think you find a lot of parallels if you compare the two issues. But regarding divorce, now that these children and they're adult children, they're speaking even though they're not supposed to, and they get a lot of flack for it. I think that's why this is becoming more clear. It brings the truth out of what actually happened, and it takes away the illusion. So, we now support the women who have gone through abortions when they're post-abortive. We support them. Yep. Many always have, but that brought a lot of truth to it. And now I think these children rebuilding relationships with their families and getting things straight and ordered and correct and being allowed to speak, that's bringing a lot of clarity to this issue.
Brilliant insight. And maybe just, ladies, if you just have any kind of closing words to encourage any women out there who are in difficult marriages.
Well, when you have grandchildren, you will see something different. You will see the legacy that you've built. You will see that a lot of the difficult times, they didn't just make your spouse milder or easier to live with. They also made you easier to live with. And you can now see that you have your own issues as well. So you need a permanent marriage to work on yourself and be allowed to stay in it long enough to make the changes and to learn to embrace the cross and learn humility and learn to love someone even with issues. And your spouse needs that too. You don't abandon that person to dealing with all of his issues and go off to the next situation. You stay in it, you stay in your marriage, and you will see the fruits later. And when you think you're in the worst marriage that you cannot imagine will ever get better, it will. And stay with it. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah. And if I could just add, don't end the story in the middle. Take divorce off the table. If there's some reason you have to physically separate, and canon law speaks of a physical separation, but with the hope of reconciliation. So keep that as your mindset if you have to leave, that you want to reconcile at some point. But don't end the story in the middle. Know that God has something past this particular road bump or even a terrible season that is going to blow your socks off, but you have to stay with it because you made a promise that is a permanent vow. It's similar to the permanent nature of holy orders. It's not holy orders, but it's a permanent promise. It's a promise that is your state of life and it's permanent till you die. You can't renege on that. So stick with it and see what God is doing. You can't know if you leave. You just can't know what he's got in store for you. So don't end the story in the middle. Just stay with him.
We decided to wing this podcast, so brilliant insight for just a no-prep podcast. Ladies, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Father.
She loves you. She thinks you're nice. She claims you got everything to take you to paradise. Ain't that our killer? She likes your loving. She likes your ring.